Have you ever wondered what invisible force might be holding back the blessings in your life? What if João Paulo II knew about an unseen obstacle that affects not just our spiritual journey, but everything from our finances to our physical well-being? Stay with me, because what I'm about to share could transform your understanding of prosperity in every aspect of your life. In today's video, we're going to explore a profound teaching that João Paulo II shared with the world, but that many have overlooked. This wisdom might be the missing key to unlocking the blessings that seem just beyond your reach. Pay close attention, because this message applies to everyone, regardless of their current circumstances. Maria was a devoted woman in her 60s, who attended Mass every Sunday and prayed the Rosary daily. She lived modestly on her retirement income in a small apartment on the outskirts of town. Despite her faithful devotion, Maria couldn't understand why she constantly struggled with anxiety about her finances and recurring health issues that doctors couldn't quite explain. She had a deep love for the Church and its teachings, especially those of João Paulo II, whom she had always admired for his wisdom and compassion. One afternoon, while cleaning out her closet, Maria found an old box containing mementos from her past. As she sifted through the items, she discovered a worn journal from 20 years ago. Flipping through its pages, she came across notes she had taken during a retreat where the priest had discussed João Paulo II's teachings on forgiveness and interior freedom. Something in those pages struck her deeply. A concept about an invisible barrier that could block blessings from flowing into our lives. I'd like to ask, if you're enjoying this type of content, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Your support means the world to us, and we'd love to hear where you're watching from in the comments below. Your perspective enriches our community, and we truly value hearing from each of you. The concept that Maria discovered in her old notes was João Paulo II's teaching on what he called attachments, not just material possessions, but emotional and spiritual attachments that we often don't recognize. In his wisdom, João Paulo II understood that these invisible objects, resentments, unforgiveness, excessive worry, unhealthy relationships with material things, could become barriers between us and the fullness of God's blessings. This teaching took Maria back to a specific memory from 15 years earlier. Her sister had borrowed a significant amount of money and never repaid it, causing a rift between them that had never been properly addressed. Maria had told herself she had forgiven her sister, but the truth was, she still harbored resentment whenever she thought about her financial struggles. Could this unresolved attachment be affecting her life in ways she hadn't recognized? João Paulo II often spoke about how our interior life affects every aspect of our exterior reality. In his encyclical Solicitudo Res Socialis, he emphasized that true development must include not only economic progress, but spiritual and moral growth as well. He taught that when we cling to invisible burdens, whether they be unforgiveness, anxiety about the future, or unhealthy relationships with money, we create obstacles to receiving the fullness of what God intends for us. The spiritual wisdom João Paulo II shared goes beyond simple religious practice. He understood the profound connection between our spiritual state and our physical and financial well-being. When we harbor resentment or unforgiveness, our bodies often manifest these emotions as physical ailments. Medical research has consistently shown that chronic stress, anxiety, and negative emotions can lead to inflammation, weakened immune response, and various health conditions. Similarly, our relationship with money is deeply tied to our spiritual beliefs and emotional attachments. João Paulo II taught that we must develop a healthy perspective on material goods, neither rejecting their importance nor becoming enslaved to them, This balance is crucial for financial wisdom that aligns with spiritual values. Maria began to wonder if the persistent anxiety she felt about her finances, despite having enough for her needs, might be connected to deeper fears about abandonment or scarcity that stemmed from childhood experiences. And could her mysterious health issues be her body's way of processing the emotional burden she had carried for so many years? Juan Paulo II once said that freedom consists not in doing what we like, but in having the right to do what we ought. This profound statement applies powerfully to our interior freedom. Many of us are not truly free because we remain bound by invisible attachments that we don't recognize or acknowledge. These attachments can take many forms. For some, it's an unhealthy relationship with material possessions, either excessive attachment or misguided rejection of material goods. For others, it's emotional baggage, resentments, regrets, or unresolved trauma that weighs on the spirit. And for many, it's fear of lack, fear of failure, fear of vulnerability that creates barriers to receiving abundance in all its forms. What made Juan Paulo II's teaching so revolutionary was his understanding that these invisible objects affect every dimension of our lives simultaneously. The person who cannot forgive will likely struggle not only in their prayer life, but also in their physical health and financial decisions. The individual who cannot develop a healthy relationship with material goods may find that both their spiritual life and their well-being suffer as a result. As Maria reflected on these teachings, she began to see connections she had never noticed before. The tension she carried in her shoulders and the recurring headaches seemed to intensify whenever she thought about her sister and the money that had come between them. Her tendency to hoard resources, keeping more food than she needed in her pantry and hesitating to give to causes she believed in, reflected a scarcity mindset that contradicted her professed trust in God's providence. Juan Paulo II taught that true prosperity comes when we align our interior world with God's design for human flourishing. This prosperity isn't measured primarily by material wealth, though it doesn't exclude financial stability. Rather, it encompasses a sense of purpose, physical well-being, healthy relationships, and spiritual peace. Inspired by these insights, Maria decided to take a bold step. She would address the invisible object that had been blocking her blessings. She reached out to her sister, not to demand repayment, but to genuinely release her from the debt and reconcile their relationship. The conversation was difficult and emotional, but by the end, something had shifted inside Maria. A weight she had carried for years had begun to lift. What happened next surprised even Maria. Within weeks of that conversation, she noticed her persistent headaches had diminished considerably. She began sleeping better, and her doctor commented on improvements in her blood pressure. But perhaps more surprisingly, her relationship with money began to transform. As she released her scarcity mindset, she found herself making wiser financial decisions from a place of sufficiency rather than fear. Juan Paulo II's teaching on attachment and freedom points to an essential truth. Our inner state creates our outer reality in many ways. When we cling to resentments, fears, and unhealthy attachments, we create blockages that affect every dimension of our lives, from our spiritual connection to our physical health and our financial circumstances. This understanding of invisible barriers resonates deeply with another of Juan Paulo II's core teachings, the dignity of the human person. He frequently emphasized that each person is created with inherent worth and purpose. When we allow invisible objects like resentment, fear, or unhealthy attachments to control our lives, we diminish our capacity to live out this dignity fully. Maria's story continues to illustrate this profound truth. As she continued her journey of interior freedom, she decided to meet with her parish priest to discuss the insights she had been discovering. Father Thomas listened attentively and then shared something that deepened her understanding even further. Juan Paulo II often spoke about what he called the structures of sin, Father Thomas explained. These aren't just social or political realities, but also the interior structures we build within ourselves, habits of thinking and feeling that can become prisons if we're not careful. This conversation helped Maria recognize that the invisible object blocking her blessings wasn't just the specific resentment toward her sister, but an entire pattern of thinking about scarcity and unworthiness that had developed over decades. This pattern had affected how she approached her health, her finances, and her relationships with others. The wise Pope understood that these interior structures don't develop in isolation. They're often formed by our experiences, cultural influences, and even family patterns passed down through generations. Perhaps your family carried beliefs about money being scarce or corrupting, or maybe you witnessed unhealthy approaches to conflict resolution that taught you to suppress emotions rather than address them directly. Juan Paulo II's teaching invites us to examine these inherited patterns with compassion and discernment. Are there beliefs about prosperity, health, or relationships that you've accepted without question? Might some of these beliefs be creating invisible barriers to the blessings God intends for you? One particularly powerful insight from Juan Paulo II comes from his reflection on suffering and redemption. He taught that our wounds and struggles, when brought into the light of faith, can become sources of blessing and growth. This perspective transforms how we view our challenges, including financial difficulties, health issues, and relational conflicts. Rather than seeing these challenges as evidence that blessings are being withheld, we can approach them as opportunities for transformation. The obstacle itself, when recognized and addressed with faith and wisdom, becomes a pathway to deeper freedom and abundance. Maria began to apply this wisdom to her approach to health. Instead of viewing her physical symptoms merely as burdens to be eliminated, she started asking what messages her body might be communicating. She discovered that her persistent digestive issues intensified during times of stress and worry, particularly about financial matters. This awareness led her to integrate spiritual practices with practical health approaches. She began setting aside time each morning for prayer and meditation, focusing particularly on releasing anxiety about the future. She also consulted with a nutritionist who helped her develop an eating plan that supported her specific health needs, and she started a modest walking routine, using this time to practice mindful presence and gratitude. As her approach to health evolved, Maria noticed that her financial attitudes were shifting as well. Juan Paulo II had taught extensively about the proper relationship to material goods, neither rejecting their importance nor becoming enslaved to them. Maria realized she had been oscillating between these extremes, sometimes depriving herself unnecessarily, and other times seeking comfort in impulsive purchases. Inspired by Juan Paulo II's teaching on stewardship, she decided to create a simple budget that reflected her values. She allocated resources for her needs, set aside a portion for savings, and most transformatively, designated a percentage for giving to causes that mattered to her. This balanced approach helped her develop a healthier relationship with money, viewing it as a tool for living with dignity and generosity rather than a source of security or anxiety. The transformation Maria experienced reflects Juan Paulo II's holistic understanding of human flourishing. He recognized that spiritual freedom, physical well-being, and material sufficiency are interconnected aspects of a life lived in alignment with divine purpose. Juan Paulo II also emphasized the importance of community in our journey toward wholeness. He taught that we are made for communion with others and that isolation often reinforces our unhealthy patterns and attachments. Maria found this to be profoundly true, as she began sharing her journey with a small faith group at her parish. In this supportive community, she discovered that many others struggled with similar invisible barriers. One woman shared how her perfectionism had created constant anxiety that manifested in chronic migraines and financial over-control. Another described how unaddressed grief had left him feeling spiritually numb and physically exhausted, affecting his ability to work effectively and manage his resources. As they applied Juan Paulo II's teachings together, supporting one another in prayer and practical accountability, each person began experiencing greater freedom and well-being. Their shared journey confirmed another of the Pope's central insights that personal transformation contributes to the renewal of society. This brings us to a critical question that Juan Paulo II might ask each of us. What invisible object might be blocking the fullness of blessing in your life? Is it an unresolved relationship, a belief about unworthiness or scarcity, fear about the future, an unhealthy attachment to comfort, control, or approval? Identifying these barriers requires honest self-reflection and often the help of others who can see what we cannot. Juan Paulo II recommended regular examination of conscience, not as an exercise in self-criticism, but as a path to greater freedom and joy. Once identified, how do we address these invisible objects? Juan Paulo II offered several practical approaches that integrate spiritual wisdom with concrete action. First, he emphasized the power of forgiveness, both offering and receiving. Unforgiveness, he taught, binds us more tightly to the very person or situation we wish to be free from. When Maria finally forgave her sister and herself, she experienced liberation that extended beyond their relationship to her entire approach to life. Second, Juan Paulo II advocated for what he called the purification of memory. This involves bringing painful past experiences into prayer, allowing divine love to heal the wounds that continue to affect our present choices. For many, this process reveals how past financial hardships, health crises, or relationship betrayals have shaped current attitudes and behaviors in limiting ways. Third, he taught the importance of renewing our minds through engagement with truth. Many of our invisible barriers are built on distortions or partial understandings. By studying sacred texts, reflecting on wise teachings, and engaging in thoughtful dialogue with others, we can replace limiting beliefs with perspectives that foster freedom and abundance. Fourth, Juan Paulo II emphasized the value of practical disciplines in our journey toward interior freedom. Regular prayer, fasting, service to others, and responsible stewardship of resources help us develop new patterns that align with our deepest values. Applying these approaches to the areas of health and finances brings remarkable results. Consider how forgiveness reduces stress and its associated physical symptoms, while also liberating us from financial decisions driven by emotional wounds. Or how the purification of memory might heal the trauma behind disordered eating patterns while also addressing unhealthy financial habits inherited from family systems. Maria's ongoing journey illustrates these connections beautifully. As she continued applying Juan Paulo II's wisdom to her life, she noticed increasing integration between her spiritual practices, her approach to health, and her financial decisions. The peace she experienced in prayer began extending into her body, reducing the tension that had contributed to her physical symptoms. And this growing sense of well-being gave her the clarity and confidence to make wiser financial choices. 6 months after beginning this intentional journey, Maria's life looked noticeably different. Her health had improved significantly, not through any dramatic medical intervention, but through the cumulative effect of reduced stress, improved sleep, moderate exercise, and mindful nutrition. Her financial situation reflected greater stability and generosity, and most importantly, she experienced a profound sense of purpose and peace that permeated every dimension of her life. Maria's transformation points to a truth that João Paulo II consistently taught. Genuine prosperity includes but transcends material well-being. It encompasses physical health, emotional balance, meaningful relationships, and spiritual vitality. And this integrated prosperity becomes possible when we identify and address the invisible objects that block its flow in our lives. You might be wondering how this teaching applies to your specific circumstances. Perhaps you've been faithful in your spiritual practices, but continue to struggle with persistent health issues or financial instability. João Paulo II's wisdom invites us to look deeper than external symptoms to the interior patterns that might be contributing to these challenges. For many, the invisible barrier involves what the Pope called disordered attachments, placing ultimate value on things that cannot provide true security or fulfillment. These might include approval from others, material comfort, control, or even our own self-sufficiency. When we orient our lives around these limited goods, we create patterns that ultimately undermine our well-being in every dimension. João Paulo II taught that freedom comes through correctly ordering our attachments, recognizing the proper place and value of every good thing while reserving our ultimate trust for what is truly ultimate. This wisdom applies directly to how we approach health and finances. In terms of health, disordered attachment might look like neglecting proper care of our bodies out of prioritizing work or achievement. Or it might manifest as excessive focus on physical appearance or performance at the expense of interior peace. And balanced living. João Paulo II reminded us that our bodies are sacred gifts, deserving neither neglect nor idolatry. Regarding finances, disordered attachment often appears as either unhealthy anxiety about material security or unrestrained pursuit of wealth and comfort. João Paulo II taught a middle way, responsible stewardship that honors the value of material resources while recognizing their limitations in providing what our hearts truly seek. Maria's story illustrates how addressing these disordered attachments creates space for true prosperity to flow. As she released her grip on resentment and fear, she experienced greater freedom in every area of life. Her health improved as emotional burdens lifted. Her financial decisions became wiser as she operated from sufficiency rather than scarcity. And her relationships deepened as she engaged from a place of genuine abundance rather than unmet need. This transformation reflects João Paulo II's understanding of what he called integral human development, growth that encompasses every dimension of our humanity. He taught that authentic progress must include spiritual, social, physical, and economic aspects, all working in harmony toward human flourishing. What makes João Paulo II's teaching particularly relevant for our time is his recognition that personal transformation and social renewal are inseparably linked. The invisible objects that block blessings in our individual lives often reflect and reinforce larger patterns in our communities and societies. Consider how Maria's journey illustrates this connection. As she addressed her own invisible barriers, she naturally began engaging differently with her community. Free from the grip of scarcity thinking, she felt more able to share her resources, time, and talents. Her growing sense of well-being gave her energy to volunteer at her parish's outreach program. And the wisdom she gained through her own healing enabled her to accompany others on similar journeys. This ripple effect embodies João Paulo II's vision of how personal conversion contributes to what he called the civilization of love. He understood that societies are transformed not primarily through external structures or policies, but through the interior freedom and authentic love of individuals in community. But João Paulo II was also realistic about the challenges we face. He recognized that identifying and removing invisible barriers requires courage, perseverance, and often support from others. The objects that block our blessings usually don't disappear overnight or without effort. Maria's experience reflects this reality. Her journey toward greater freedom and prosperity unfolded gradually, with moments of breakthrough, but also periods of struggle and setback. There were days when old patterns of resentment and anxiety resurfaced strongly, and she questioned whether real change was possible. What sustained her through these difficulties was another key element of João Paulo II's teaching: hope. Not superficial optimism, but profound trust in the possibility of renewal and redemption. This hope gave her the courage to persist when the path became difficult, to begin again when she faltered, and to believe that greater freedom and abundance were truly possible. João Paulo II's message of hope extended to every dimension of human experience. He believed in the possibility of healing for our bodies, wisdom in our material decisions, redemption in our relationships, and renewal in our communities. This comprehensive hope counters the tendency toward fragmentation that characterizes much of modern life. So how might we apply this integrated wisdom to address the invisible objects blocking blessings in our own lives? João Paulo II would likely suggest several practical approaches. First, he would encourage us to practice regular self-examination with both honesty and compassion. What patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving seem to create obstacles in your life? Where do you notice disconnections between your spiritual beliefs and your daily choices regarding health and finances? What fears or attachments seem to limit your freedom in these areas? Second, João Paulo II would recommend bringing these insights into prayer and, when possible, spiritual direction or counseling. Interior barriers often have deep roots that benefit from both divine grace and human wisdom. A trusted guide can help us discern the nature of our invisible objects and develop strategies for addressing them effectively. Third, he would advocate for concrete changes in behavior that align with our deepest values. Interior freedom grows through practical choices, forgiveness offered, boundaries established, disciplines embraced, generosity practiced. These exterior actions both express and deepen the interior transformations we seek. Fourth, João Paulo II would emphasize the importance of community in sustaining our journey. Surrounding ourselves with others who share our commitment to integrated growth creates accountability, encouragement, and wisdom beyond what we can generate alone. As Maria continued implementing these approaches, she experienced increasingly stable transformation. The changes in her thinking and feeling became embodied in new neural pathways and behavioral patterns. Her improved health reinforced her sense of well-being, which in turn supported wiser financial choices, which then reduced stress and its physical symptoms. This virtuous cycle reflected João Paulo II's understanding of human flourishing as an integrated reality. 1 year after beginning her intentional journey, Maria decided to celebrate by hosting a small gathering in her home. She invited her sister, with whom she had rebuilt a warm relationship, along with several friends from her parish community. As they shared a simple but abundant meal, the conversation turned to how each person had experienced growth and blessing over the past year. What struck Maria most powerfully was how unique each person's journey had been. Gabriel, a retired teacher, described how addressing his perfectionism had alleviated his chronic back pain and freed him to enjoy his modest pension without constant anxiety about the future. Sophia shared how reconciling with her adult son had lifted a depression that had affected her for years, giving her energy to start a small home business that provided both purpose and supplemental income. Their diverse experiences confirmed Another aspect of João Paulo II's wisdom, that the path to integrated prosperity honors the uniqueness of each person's circumstances, challenges, and gifts. While certain principles apply universally, their application takes wonderfully varied forms. This diversity reflects João Paulo II's profound respect for human freedom and dignity. He taught that each person must discover and address their particular invisible objects through a combination of divine grace, personal responsibility, and communal support. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to removing the barriers that block our blessings. At the same time, João Paulo II identified certain invisible objects that commonly affect many people in our contemporary context. These include materialistic, thinking that reduces human worth to productive or consumer value; individualism, that isolates us from meaningful community; relativism, that undermines our capacity to recognize truth; and secularism, that compartmentalizes faith rather than allowing it to integrate all dimensions of life. These cultural tendencies often become internalized as personal barriers that affect our spiritual lives, physical health, and financial decisions. The person who has unconsciously absorbed materialistic values may struggle with both body image issues and compulsive spending. The individual influenced by extreme individualism might experience both spiritual isolation and financial choices that ignore communal well-being. João Paulo II's response to these cultural challenges was not withdrawal or condemnation, but engagement grounded in clear identity and purpose. He encouraged believers to participate fully in society while maintaining the counter-cultural perspectives that foster true freedom and authentic prosperity. This engaged yet distinctive stance applies directly to how we approach health and finances. Regarding health, João Paulo II advocated neither rejection of medical advances nor uncritical acceptance of every trend or treatment. Instead, he encouraged thoughtful discernment that values physical well-being while recognizing the human person as an integrated whole with spiritual and relational dimensions that affect health. Similarly, his approach to economic life endorsed neither unrestrained capitalism nor state-controlled systems, but what he called an economy of communion that recognizes both the value and limitations of material prosperity. This balanced perspective helps us develop financial practices that support genuine human flourishing rather than undermining it. As Maria reflected on these teachings one evening, she realized how profoundly her understanding of blessing had evolved. Previously, she had thought of blessings primarily as favorable circumstances or material provisions, good health, financial stability, positive relationships. While she still valued these gifts, she now recognized that the greatest blessing was the interior freedom to receive and respond to life with faith, hope, and love. This freedom remained available even when circumstances were challenging. During a period when her arthritis flared painfully, Maria discovered she could still experience blessing in the form of compassion from friends, deeper prayer, and the opportunity to practice trust. When unexpected home repairs strained her budget, she found blessing in the creativity this limitation inspired and the interdependence it fostered with her community. João Paulo II had lived this truth himself during his final years, when his physical health declined significantly. Even as his body weakened, his spirit remained vibrantly engaged with life and ministry. His example demonstrated that genuine prosperity transcends circumstances to find expression in every season and situation. This understanding transformed how Maria viewed both suffering and abundance in her life. Rather than seeing difficulties as evidence that blessings were blocked, she began recognizing how challenges often became pathways to deeper freedom and more authentic prosperity. And rather than taking favorable circumstances for granted, she received them with profound gratitude as expressions of divine generosity. João Paulo II's integrated wisdom continues to offer guidance for our complex world. His teaching reminds us that the barriers between ourselves and the blessings God intends are often invisible, but nonetheless real. These barriers might be resentments we harbor, fears we haven't addressed, attachments that have become disordered, or beliefs that limit our capacity to receive abundance in all its forms. Identifying and removing these invisible objects isn't a one-time event, but a lifelong journey of growing freedom and expanding capacity. This journey integrates every dimension of our humanity: spiritual, physical, emotional, relational, and material. Progress in one area naturally supports growth in others, creating an upward spiral of flourishing that João Paulo II would recognize as authentic human development. As you reflect on your own life, consider what invisible object might be blocking the fullness of blessing God desires for you. Is there a relationship needing reconciliation, a fear requiring courage to face, an attachment asking to be properly ordered, a belief waiting to be transformed by truth? João Paulo II's teaching assures us that addressing these barriers creates space for true prosperity to flow, not just material wealth, though it doesn't exclude financial sufficiency, but the integrated abundance that encompasses spiritual vitality, physical well-being, emotional balance, meaningful relationships, and material stewardship. Maria's story reminds us that this journey toward greater freedom and abundance often begins with a seemingly small insight or decision. For her, it was discovering notes from a long-ago retreat and deciding to reach out to her estranged sister. What might be the first step on your path to removing the invisible objects blocking your blessings? João Paulo II often quoted Jesus' words, "The truth will set you free." This promise applies powerfully to the invisible barriers we've been discussing. As we allow truth to illuminate our interior patterns, beliefs, and attachments, we experience growing freedom from what has blocked the flow of blessing in our lives. This freedom isn't an end in itself, but rather creates capacity for what João Paulo II considered the ultimate purpose of human life: giving and receiving love. As we address the invisible objects that limit us, we become more available to love God, others, and even ourselves with greater authenticity and generosity. Maria discovered that this expanding capacity for love was perhaps the most significant blessing of her journey. As interior barriers dissolved, she found herself more present to each encounter, more responsive to others' needs, and more able to receive care when she needed it. This growing communion reflected João Paulo II's vision of human flourishing at its highest level. As our time together draws to a close, I invite you to carry João Paulo II's wisdom into your daily life. Begin noticing where invisible objects might be creating barriers between you and the blessings intended for you. Approach these discoveries with courage and compassion, knowing that greater freedom and abundance await on the other side of the barriers. Remember that this journey integrates all dimensions of your humanity. The steps you take towards spiritual freedom will naturally support physical well-being and wise stewardship of resources. And the choices you make regarding health and finances will either reinforce or undermine your interior freedom. João Paulo II believed deeply in the possibility of transformation for individuals, communities, and societies. His hope wasn't based on naive optimism, but on profound faith in the power of truth and love to overcome every barrier. This hope remains available to each of us as we address the invisible objects that have limited our experience of blessing. As Maria's life illustrates, the journey toward greater freedom and prosperity unfolds uniquely for each person. Your path will reflect your particular circumstances, challenges, and gifts. What remains constant is the promise that as invisible barriers are removed, blessings flow more freely into and through your life. I hope this exploration of João Paulo II's wisdom has given you practical insights for your own journey. I'd love to hear about the invisible objects you've identified in your life and the steps you're taking to address them. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, may you grow in the freedom that allows blessings to flow abundantly in every dimension of your life.